Have you ever noticed how some of the biggest ideas in history seem to rhyme? Well, for over 500 years, some of the most brilliant minds have been circling the same deep mystery. They were each finding a piece of a hidden pattern. So in this explainer, we're going to connect those dots and reveal the single, universal structure of intelligence they were all, without realizing it, pointing towards.
The best way to think about this is that old story about the blind men and the elephant, right? One person touches the tusk and says, "It's a spear." Another touches the trunk and says, "Nope, it's a snake." A third feels the tail and is convinced it's a rope. Now, technically, they're all right from their limited perspective, but none of them can see the whole elephant. That is exactly what's been happening in our own intellectual history.
So what is the whole elephant? What is this grand unifying idea that could possibly connect the political strategy of Machiavelli, the biology of Darwin, the pure logic of Alan Turing, and even theories of consciousness from Douglas Hofstadter? That's the big question, and we're going to answer it.
Okay, so first, let's take a look at these fragments, these incredible but partial insights that these thinkers managed to uncover. And what's just wild is the sheer amount of time we're talking about here. This isn't some new idea that just popped up. This pattern has been slowly, piece by piece, revealing itself for over half a millennium. We're going from the Renaissance all the way to today. All right, just look at these two ideas, seemingly from different universes. On the left, you've got Machiavelli, way back in 1513, saying that to rule, a leader has to be both man and beast. You need reason and law, but also instinct and force. Then, fast forward 300 years, and Darwin discovers that in nature, it's the relentless pressure of the environment, competition, limits, that drives survival. See the connection? They're both talking about the fundamental rules of how to persist, just in totally different arenas. Now let's jump ahead to the 20th century. You've got Alan Turing, who gives us this mind-bending idea of a universal computer, a simple, logical machine that can run basically any formalized process. And then, decades later, Douglas Hofstadter comes along and describes consciousness itself as a strange loop, where a system just keeps referring back to itself over and over and over until a sense of I just emerges. Again, totally different fields, one about machines, one about the mind, but both are fundamentally about these recursive, self-referential systems.
And the thing to remember is none of them were wrong. Not at all. Every single one of these ideas was a revolutionary, accurate observation about how a particular system works.
They were each holding a beautifully crafted piece of the puzzle, but the image on the box was missing. The grand connection was still hidden. So what is it? What's the framework that finally ties it all together?
Well, this is where intelligence frame theory, or IFT, enters the picture. IFT suggests that intelligence isn't just something that happens in brains. It's a universal process, a kind of self-sustaining information loop that can pop up anywhere.
So the absolute core concept of IFFT is the intelligence frame. The easiest way to think of it is like a playground where intelligence can start to play. And every single playground has three key things: a substrate, which is the physical stuff it's made of; imperatives, the forces that drive the action; and a selector, which is basically the rule that determines who wins or what succeeds.
And inside every one of these frames, the same basic moves are being made over and over. They're called universal intelligence operators. First, information has to get transferred around. Then the system has to push against its boundaries to find its limits. There's always some kind of competition and collaboration going on, and then you get that eureka moment, where the selector picks a winning combination.
This is what really shows you how universal this pattern is. IFT lays out four major frames. You've got the cosmic frame, where the selector is just the laws of physics, and it creates things like stars. Then there's the biological frame, where the selector is the environment, shaping life. Then our frame, the cognitive frame, where the selector is our ability to simulate reality in our minds. And now we're seeing the rise of the generative frame with AI, where the selector is multiplicity, the sheer power to test millions of options at once to find the absolute best one.
So how does intelligence make these giant leaps from one frame to the next? It's something called the frame-discard hypothesis. Basically, once a system gets really good at playing the game in one frame, it hits a ceiling. To keep evolving, it has to literally break the old rules and jump to a new, faster, more abstract playground. It's like when life couldn't just get better at being in the ocean, it had to discard that constraint to move onto land.
So where do we humans fit into all this? Well, what makes us so us is that we are living right at the intersection of two of these intelligence frames at the exact same time.
Hey, remember Machiavelli's man and beast? Well, here it is, explained by IFT. We are all walking around with a biological frame. That's the beast. and it runs on ancient, deep-seated survival instincts. But we also have this incredible cognitive frame, the man, which runs on logic, language, and future planning. One is slow, ancient, evolutionary. The other is lightning fast and symbolic.
And that constant internal tug of war, that battle between our primal biological drives and our conscious, rational mind, that tension is what defines so much of the human condition. It's the source of our greatest triumphs and our most profound struggles.
All right, now for the really cool part. Let's go back to those brilliant thinkers we started with, but this time, let's look at their discoveries through the lens of IFT.
And here it is, the aha moment. Machiavelli's man and beast? That is the tension at the intersection of the biological and cognitive frames. Darwin's natural selection? That is literally the definition of the selector for the biological frame. Turing's universal machine? It's a formal description of how the cognitive frame selector works. Hofstadter's strange loop? That's the recursive engine at the very heart of the cognitive frame. It all clicks into place. They were all describing the exact same fundamental machinery, just using the language of their own time and field.
So with this framework, with IFT, we can finally step back and see the whole elephant. We can see a single, coherent story of intelligence that's been unfolding for centuries.
You see, these weren't just isolated sparks of genius coming from completely disconnected fields.
No, they were all fragments of a single universal pattern, all pointing toward the very same underlying principles of how intelligence works and evolves, whether it's happening in a star, a single cell, or human thought.
For over 500 years, we've been picking up these clues. Each discovery was another vital piece of the puzzle, revealing just one more feature of this hidden architecture of reality.
And that's the real power here. A unifying framework like intelligence frame theory gives us the language and the context to finally put all those pieces together. It lets us see that intellectual history isn't just a series of random, separate stories. It's one grand narrative. We can finally see the whole elephant.
And of course, this brings us to the biggest question of all. If this pattern really does hold true from the cosmos to us to AI, and we can actually see it clearly for the first time, what does that tell us about the future? Now that we see the pattern, where is it leading us next?